Hello everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to give an update about risk across the crypto market. If you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter, where we put out regular updates about our risk indicators and more. Before I get into that, I do just want to give a reminder that we have a survey up where we want to get feedback from the community about our content, as well as what you'd like to see on a website that we are collaborating with Jay from Daily Crypto Analysis to create, that will host live UDPI data along with Jay's risk model, the DCA risk index, and our other models here at the channel, as well as other data. So we're curious to get your feedback, and in exchange for participating in that survey, we're going to give you some early access to UDPI data specifically for Bitcoin and Ethereum. But I did want to give a reminder about this because we're actually going to be closing down this survey today on Sunday, March 6th. So if you want to get access to that live UDPI data, make sure to participate in the survey, because that's going to be closing today. And then you'll get access to this dashboard that'll have Bitcoin and Ethereum UDPI data for all the three different timeframes. All right, so let's get into talking about risk in the crypto market right now. So I want to start off with Bitcoin, being kind of the main barometer of the crypto market. And we're in a similar spot to where we have been in the previous weeks when I talked about this. But overall, Bitcoin is, the UDPI is kind of bullish long-term. So the long-term UDPI is kind of moves to play out over months to years, so much more of a long-term risk. And here we're still at negative 1.75. Now this is elevated from where it had been just a few weeks previously, so that might be one sign that the UDPI thinks that we're getting to a bit more uncertain territory right now, that with the way that Bitcoin's been behaving, there is plausible downside that could happen in the coming months. But overall, it sees there being more realistic upside than downside. But when we go to the shorter term timeframes, we see a lot more indecision here. So in the medium term, kind of weeks to months kind of time frame, here we're almost at zero, just negative 0.5, so very undecided. And the short term, we've also cooled back down. Now, this is a good thing in a way for the short term UDPI here. This is days to weeks, the time frame it cares about. We had been actually a bit overextended. We had been up around 1 not too long ago, but now we've cooled off substantially from there. And what that might mean is that, as Bitcoin really rallied out of the lows at around 34K, and has now been kind of pulling back or just kind of going sideways, we've kind of are maybe accruing some more short-term upside potential that might be kind of setting us back up, that if we're to get another nice move to the upside, that's becoming maybe a little bit more plausible from this perspective. Now, if we flip over to Ethereum, being the other big player in the crypto space, it's a very similar story, right? So the long term is negative 1.87. So again, more upside than downside potential is realistic in the longer term. But in the more shorter term timeframes, it's very undecided. So hovering very close to zero, meaning that it thinks there's about an even amount of upside or downside potential that's realistic in the coming kind of weeks to months and days to weeks. And so really the overall picture I'm getting from Bitcoin and Ethereum is a lot of indecision, at least in the short to medium term, that it really could go either way in the mind of the model. It does think that in the long term that there's more upside than downside, but in the shorter term timeframes, it's a lot more undecided. And this kind of carries over to the altcoins as well. So here I'm showing you all the different altcoins that we're monitoring currently with UDPI indicators. What you can see is that in the long term, a lot of them are quite, a decent number of them are pretty far into the negatives, but some of them are hovering a little bit more up in towards the neutral. But notably, this week, I believe every single asset is negative on the long term. This is the first time in a while that's been the case. There were some that have been kind of holding out a little bit above zero. Now, every single asset that we're monitoring is below zero, although some only just so, like Phantom. So again, in the long term, this just means that for altcoins, the UDPI thinks there's more realistic upside than downside potential. But as I mentioned before with altcoins, they're very sensitive to the sentiment in the market, being the higher risk end of the crypto space, which is already treated as a high risk asset class. So this is really going to be dependent on what Bitcoin does, right? Don't think that a super low UDPI level here guarantees the bottom's in for these, because it's really going to be depending on what Bitcoin does and whether or not there's more of that realistic downside potential they have to realize before a bottom can actually be formed. If we move to our more shorter term time frames, so here's the medium term time frame. Here we do have a couple, or at least one that's in the positive. That would be Luna, after its quite impressive moves that it's been putting in more recently. But again, overall quite negative. And in the short term, here we have a little bit more variability, a little bit more indecision here. You can see Luna is actually quite overextended in the short term, which makes me think that its kind of current move is probably going to need to cool off, is my expectation, especially in these more bearish conditions. Getting up to 2 on the short-term UDPI is probably about as much as you might expect. But anyway, who knows? Anything could happen. But overall, with these, again, most of them are in the negative, with some being a little bit more undecided. But really, again, with these, as I've said before, you need to take them in context of the broader crypto market. And that's where I sometimes think that changing the frame of reference on these can be helpful. And instead of treating 0 as that kind of neutral midpoint, maybe treating -2 or even -3, depending how bearish the outside conditions seem, as being that kind of level between break-even risk-reward. Now, to give my overall impression across all of these, I think my overall thesis remains the same. That I think in the long term, when we're looking back, a year from now, this probably will have looked like a good accumulation zone. That would be my expectation. Whenever the rise does come, it's one of those things, like with Bitcoin, for example, if you go back to the 2018 bear market, people who were acquiring Bitcoin at 6K, they had to endure a lot of pain as Bitcoin dropped down to around 3K, probably felt horrible at the time, but then once Bitcoin was up in the 60Ks, buying at 6K feels pretty good. So I wouldn't be surprised if a similar thing plays out here, where we're in a very bearish condition right now, and barring a collapse in the stock market or something like that, more likely than not, in my opinion, in the long term, Bitcoin at, in the 30 to 40Ks will look great if Bitcoin's trading at, over 100K at that later time into the future. It's just that we don't know when that's going to happen, right? That could happen, this year, that can happen next year. We really just don't know. And so we're going to have to just wait and see. So really with these risk models, again, it's trying to just give you a general idea of where we are in the market, not necessarily telling you when something has to blast off. And so we're just going to have to watch and see what happens. And so certainly with altcoins, I just think that caution makes a lot of sense, because we don't really know if Bitcoin's going to dump or what's going to happen. Because these are the higher risk assets, it's also just makes sense to me to be a little bit more cautious with these. But who knows? If the market does become bullish, if Bitcoin really starts rallying, then the highest returns will come from altcoins. So that's always going to be the kind of the trade-off there. A lot more downside risk, but there's also a lot more upside risk. So, of course, none of this is financial advice. You should make your own opinions, form your own opinions about the data I've been presenting. My overall take is that we're currently, at least in the shorter term, in a very undecided place. But in the long term, more likely than not, this will have looked like a good accumulation zone. All right, if you like the content and remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like and follow us on Twitter. And remember, with UDPI, we're all going to make it.